In this video, we're going to add authentication to our NextJs 13 app using Clerk authentication. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Hamid. I'm a full stack web developer. And here on this channel, we talk about modern web dev topics like React and NextJs. So let's get going. Now, a couple of weeks ago on the channel, I created this e-commerce site using NextJs 13 app directory and Swell, which is a headless e-commerce solution that comes built in with subscriptions. If you haven't watched that video, you can watch that video first to know how we got here. In this video, we're going to add authentication to that application using Clerk. Now, usually I use NextAuth for authentication in NextJS, but a couple of days ago, I came across Clerk and I liked it how easy it was to set it up. So you can go to clerk.com, sign up for an account. It's easy. You can create an application, and from there, you'd be able to add it to your NextJS app. If you head to the documentation, there is a NextJS specific section where it tells you how to go about installing it, which we're going to walk through today together. And it also comes with some UI components such as sign in, sign up, user buttons, user profiles and stuff that makes it easy to quickly add authentication and add these UI components to your app. So it looks something like this. As you can see, I have this sign in button over there. If I'm not signed in, I can click on it. It shows me the modals. I have currently set it up to use Google login and email login. And this is another thing that's pretty easy with Clerk. If I go back to my dashboard for this next ecom application that I created on Clerk, you see I have this user and authentication over here. I know it's a bit tiny. Make this a bit bigger. So as you can see here, you can add different options such as email, phone, username. You can allow them to have usernames, allow them to have passwords, or maybe make them use an email or a magic link or a password-less magic link. You can turn them on and off, and it just works out of the box. You don't have to set up an email client to send these emails. It just works that way in the development area. So it comes with different environments you can have and set up these things. The good thing is that in development mode, all of these are set up for you. So if you go to social connections, for now I have the Google, but if you wanted to maybe, let's say, add Facebook to it, you could just turn it on. And if I go back to my application and refresh this page and click the sign in again, this time you should be able to see that Facebook there, and you don't have to go create an app in the Facebook backend to create that OAuth client. It just works. They have already set that up for your development. If you want to push to production, then you're going to go ahead and create that app in the OAuth client that you want, whether it's Google, Facebook, or GitHub. So that's pretty awesome. One of the things that makes it easy to just spin up authentication and start testing with different OAuth clients. And in this video, we're going to just follow their instruction on their beta docs, which is going to give you a link to. So if you go to their documentation, you can see this pops up over here. To go to their new docs, you can follow along on the old docs too. The material is more or less the same, but I'm for the app directory, I'm just using this beta version of their documentation. And again, there's two different versions of working with NextJS. One is in the pages directory, which is NextJS 12, and this newer version, which is the app directory beta, which is the NextJS 13 and the app router. So first thing first, we need to install the Clerk NextJS client. I've already done that. You can go ahead and do it if you're following along. By the way, I'm including this link to the source code to GitHub repository in the description, so you can kind of follow along with me. But I'm going to explain everything that I have done so far to add authentication to our app, to our e-commerce site that was in the previous video. So next step after installing the package is setting up environment variables. There's two environment variables you need to set: your publishable key and your secret key. The publishable key, it's public and it's also available to the client side. So if you go back to your dashboard, there's this API key section that you can get these two values and then set it up inside your .env.local file. I've included this .env.example here. We have this swell environment variables from the previous video, and then we can add these Clerk specific environments down here. Once you've done that, we're going to wrap our root layout with the Clerk provider. This is a React context provider. Let me just go to my app, to my root layout, and close this off. So all I'm doing over here, as you can see, this is the root layout inside our app directory. So it's the outermost page and layout, which represents the home page and the root layout. If you're not very comfortable with how the app directory is set up and the structure works, I'm going to include a link to a playlist that I have on the channel where I introduce this new structure, and then as it also talks about all the new features as NextJs 13 kind of progress with the minor patches and updates. So what we're having here is a header footer component that represents our root layout, and I'm just wrapping this whole thing with Clerk provider, so I have access to Clerk goodies inside of my layout or basically all of my components there. So once we've done that, we can build our sign up and sign in page. So back in the app directory, I have this sign up page. Inside of it, all I'm doing is I am rendering this sign up component from Clerk. So just one thing to note is that these UI components, if I go back to the docs over here, these UI components that you can see here, they do come in a regular package from Clerk NextJs. But for using them inside of your app router, you're going to have to import them from this app-beta. That's the only thing you need to know. So that's our sign up, which basically just embeds this sign up component inside of a page. So let's actually see that in our application. If I close this off and go to /sign, let's say up, you can see here, this is a regular page there. This is not a modal, and it has just embedded this component inside there. And here it also comes with this sign in link, which takes me back to the sign in link and sets up some redirect URLs. There is currently an issue with the way the paths work in the app folder and how Clerk is working with the app router. But I've just created these two pages, so we know for our home page, I'm not using the sign in page, I'm using a sign in modal as I mentioned, and we're going to look at this button and what it does in a second. So similar to the sign up page, we have this sign in page also, and all we're doing here is just getting this sign in component from Clerk NextJS /app-beta and then rendering it here. So again, if I go to /sign in, we see the same kind of built-in component embedded here. Now the only difference on the sign in page is I want to be able to redirect the users back to where they started from once they're on the sign in page. So imagine I have a protected page like dashboard we're going to build together, and if they try to access the dashboard, I'm going to send them to sign in. Once they sign in, I want to take them back to the dashboard. So I'm reading this redirect URL from the search parameters that's passed to my page component by NextJS already, because this is a React server component. It receives these query strings or search parameters. And if there is any redirect URL, I'm going to pass that into my signing component. So once Clerk goes ahead and signs the users in, it's going to redirect them back to whatever URL you pass in here. We're going to set this together when we actually implement the dashboard, but I just thought to mention it over here. Okay, so next step from the docs here is to add the middleware. So now if you want to access the session and user data on the service side. For example, in your route handlers or API routes, or inside your React server components, because they run on the server, you need to add this middleware. To add a middleware, you just add this middleware.js or TS file to the root of your application. And the only thing you need to add to it is really this with Clerk middleware that wraps this middleware and returns the next response. Now, we can use this also for protecting our pages. Now, if you scroll down on the docs, you can see there's two ways to protect your pages. One of them is with this same middleware. So in the middleware itself, we can define some public paths or protected paths, the paths that we want to be password or authenticated. And we're going to just check to see if the URL that the user is trying to access is a public URL. And if it is, we're going to just return our response to forward them to that page. And if it is inside of our protected pages defined up here, either by defining the public path and considering everything else protected, or defining protected paths and just checking to see if this path request.nextURL.path name is actually one of our protected ones. And if it is, we're going to use this get auth function to check in if there is a user. If there is no user, we're going to create this sign in URL, set some search parameters for the redirect URL. This is where we want to send them after they sign in, and we're just going to redirect them to the sign in page. So this is all you need to do inside of this middleware, which runs on the edge, that you can authenticate or protect pages. So if they're trying to access a protected page that you have defined, we're going to see if they're logged in or not. If they're not, we're going to redirect them back to the sign-in page. So that's one way of protecting your pages in your whole application. Now, the second way is this control components that comes in Clerk, the signed in and signed out components that conditionally render the components if the user is signed in, for example, or if they're signed out. Now, I'm using this because on the header or on the dashboard page, I'm using a client component. Because when I use the server component, it didn't quite refresh the page when I log out of the dashboard page. So we're going to talk about the problem that I had there. But we're going to use this control component because the middleware is pretty straightforward. It's a very good way to do it. But in our use case, we're going to use the control component. Now, reading the session and user data, we're going to finish here and then jump back into the code. You have these hooks that you can call on the client side, such as use auth and use user. We're going to see this in action as well. And on the server side, if you are inside of the pages directory, you can use this get auth function. And this current user function, it's more usable for the app router, which we're going to see in a second together. You download it from or import it from NextJs, Clerk NextJs app beta, and then you can check your user in your React server components or API routes or route handlers, as they call it inside the app directory. So that's about it. Let's jump back into the code and let's start from this header component that has this sign in button. So I'm going to go inside my app components layout and header. And this header is what we've designed in the previous video that has this shopping cart button that opens this slider for the shopping cart. It has a link to our product page and a logo there. Now all I have added is this sign in button. And for this sign in button, as you can see here, these are the components I am getting from Clerk. This sign in button and the user button. These two are one of the many UI components that comes in with Clerk. So if you go here, there's this user button. This component allows the user to manage their account. So if you can see there's the avatar, you click on it, it opens up a modal. We're going to see together. And then it allows them to manage their account or sign out. That's the user button. And the user profile, it just allows them to kind of see and manage their profile there. So, and the other two components I'm getting from Clerk is signed in and signed out. These are the control components we talked just a minute ago. We're getting them from app beta, but from the client package because This is a client component. So if you're importing it from Clerk NextJS app beta, that will be the server version, which you can run on your React Server components or server render pages or inside your app router. If you're using it in the use client, you just have to add this client to it. So down here, this is where I'm adding that, I'm rendering that shopping cart button, and inside of it and beside it, I just have this control component. So if the user is signed in, I'm going to show this user button. If they are signed out, I'm going to show this sign in button, and sign in button was another one of these components, not here. So if we go back to the component references, UI components, we can see there's this sign in button, which just links to the sign in URL, or it opens a sign in modal. And this is what we're doing here. So you can pass in a mode to it and say, hey, if the client clicks on this button, I want to open up a modal. If you don't pass in anything by default, it just redirects them or sends them to the sign in page. Now, by default, it renders a button, but if you want to style this button differently, you can pass in a button yourself, and that's all I'm doing here. So sign in button up there. If I click on it, it opens this sign in modal from Clerk, already built in with the options that I selected. And if I go ahead and continue with Google over here, select my account, I'll be redirected back to my homepage, and this time you can see my avatar there. And this is this user button that we just rendered here conditionally if the user is signed in. So if I click on it, you can see this opens up, gives me access to manage my account. You can add emails, you can change your profile picture, and also you can just sign out of here, which goes back to a unauthenticated state. So if I go back in here and log in one more time, you can see here on our links up top, I've also added this dashboard. So this is, our protected route, which you can only access if you are signed in. Now, as you can see here, if I sign out while I am in the dashboard page, it just takes me back to the sign in page and sets a redirect URL. And this is what I mentioned by setting a search parameter that we can read in the sign in. Now, if I sign in over here, it should redirect me back to the dashboard page where I can access maybe my previous orders, maybe my subscriptions, which we're going to build together, by the way, in the future videos. So we're going to make this a fully featured e-commerce kind of platform where you can add products, where you can have subscriptions. And in each video, we're going to just add a section to it. This dashboard page is a user page that they can access their order history or their subscription plans. So let's actually see how I have implemented these over here. So this link, just before I forget it, this dashboard link that conditionally shows up inside of our links. Again, it's using this signed in control component from Clerk. If you're signed in, I'm going to show this dashboard. If you're not signed in, we're not going to see this link. Now, the next thing, let's actually look at this dashboard page and see how we're dealing with this dashboard page. So the dashboard page is a client component, and inside of it, we are using this use user hook from Clerk that gives us the access to the user object, or whether or not they're signed in. I'm also using the use router from Next Navigation that helps me redirect the user to the sign-in page if they're not signed in. So all I'm doing here is I'm checking to see if Clerk has done loading the user, and if they have, and the user is not signed in, I'm going to use this router that I got from Next Router, and I'm going to push them or redirect them to the sign-in page. Now, while I'm doing that, I'm also setting this redirect URL. And because I'm on the dashboard page, I'm setting the URL back to the dashboard. So therefore, in the signing component that we just saw together over here, we are reading this same redirect URL on the search parameters and passing it down to Clerk signing component. So if there is a redirect URL, once they signed in, they're going to be redirected back to that page. So going back to the dashboard page, we're just setting this so that if they're signing in, they're just going to be redirected back to the dashboard. And if they're already signed in and they're trying to access this page where they're going to see their dashboard, currently there's nothing in it, but you get the idea. So this is how I went about protecting this page. Now, if this was a React server component and I wanted to protect it against authentication, now let's see how we would go about doing that. So let's comment this out. If we go back to the docs for the NextJs and head down to the app directory, we can see here this current user function we can call. So let me just get this down. I'm going to comment these two out for now. So I get the current user. We can't use a hook or the use router because we are inside of a server component. So what I'm doing is to get the current user. So let's just call that over here and say const user equals await current user. And I have to turn my component into an async function to be able to get this user. Now I can down here check to see, well, if there is no user, I can redirect to sign in. Okay, let's just recap what we've done here. We eliminated that use client. We commented our hooks out because we can't use hooks inside React server components. We got this current user function from Clerk NextJs app beta, which allows us to get the current user inside of our server side, in our backend. And we're getting this redirect from Next Navigation that allows us to redirect to whatever page that we want. So if we don't have a user set up or signed in, we're going to redirect them to sign in. Let's actually also pass in that redirect URL set to / dashboard. Let me just save this, go back to our app, and go here. Let's sign out, refresh the page. And if I now try to get into the dashboard page, it should redirect me back to the sign-in page, and it did, and it also set up that redirect URL. So I'm going to go ahead and continue with Google, sign in. It should take me back to the dashboard, and it did. So everything works. We were able to just do this with a React server component too. But the problem that I faced was if I'm on the dashboard page and try to log out now, it logs me out. The header component updates because that's a client component. So when I'm interacting with it, it just gets updated. But it stays on the dashboard page even though I have logged out. Now this should have just reloaded the page, but currently it's not quite working the way that it should unless I refresh the page, which updates the session, realizes I'm not logged in, and redirects me back to the sign-in page. But this isn't quite as secure as I wanted it to be. So instead of using a React server component, I just used a client component. And with the client component, because the state changes, it re-renders that page and you're logged out. So it just redirects back to the sign-in page as we've seen together. So let's comment them back in. I'm going to now comment these out. I'm going to turn this component back to a regular component. We don't want these guys anymore, and instead we're going to just do it this way. Now this way, if I just show the same thing we did together there, if I'm signed out and actually sign in and go to my dashboard page, and if I sign out while I'm on the dashboard page, it redirects me back to the sign-in page. Now, for the dashboard page, for the user profile page, it's actually better to render it on the client side because, first of all, it's a protected page. You don't want it to be explored or indexed by search engines. So it doesn't matter if you're rendering it on the client side. And it's usually interactive, whereas the user is signing in, signing out, or maybe updating their profile or turning their subscriptions on and off. So it may work better if we're just rendering it client side, but this is just a little experiment I did with the React Server components, and that it wasn't quite working when I was signing out while being on the dashboard page. Okay, with these out of the way, we have set up our authentication, our sign in button on the header, a component for them to sign in and sign up. We have seen a protected page for the dashboard page. We have created our sign in and sign up specific pages where you can redirect the user to sign in and sign up. Now, the last thing is, how would you go about protecting your API routes? So let's go to our API routes. This new route handlers in NextJs 13.2, I believe they were introduced. So you no longer need to use the pages directory for your API endpoints. You can use them inside of your app directory. Again, I have a dedicated video on the channel where I walk you through the new route handlers and how the convention is there and the differences between the pages or the API endpoints in the pages directory. But at a higher level, you can put in this route.js or TS files anywhere in any of these folders that you have inside of your app, and it turns that file into an endpoint. You don't have to necessarily put it inside of an API folder, just like how you had to inside the pages directory. So in NextJs 12, you had to put your API endpoint inside of a folder called API. But here in the app directory, you don't have to do it. You could just put this route.js files anywhere inside of these folders to kind of mimic that same behavior. It cannot be at the same level as a page or layout, because then NextJs won't understand if you're trying to hit the endpoint or if you're trying to get the page. But it's not necessarily, it doesn't need to be inside of the API, but I did it inside the API to kind of make it simpler to understand. So if you have this hello endpoint and this route inside of it, now you're going to have to export named functions or handlers from these route.js files in this new convention. So I'm exporting a get for a get request to this endpoint. And as you can see, I'm using this current user from the Clerk NextJs app beta, which runs on the server side, gives me the user on the server side. If there is no user, I'm going to send a next response, and this is an extension of the response API. It comes with some helper functions such as this JSON. I'm sending a message to say you're not logged in, and if there is a user, I am just sending the first name of the user if it exists. So let's actually test this out. If I go to /API hello, I'm going to get you're not logged in message because I wasn't logged in. So if I go back to my application now, I wasn't logged in. I don't know why it showed me as logged in. So maybe I just went back. It loaded the previous session inside the browser stack. So if I sign in here now and continue with Google and sign in, now I'm signed into the account. I can refresh to make sure this is actually signed in. If I go to the dashboard, I see my dashboard. Sure. So if I now try to access that same API hello, this time because I'm signed in, it shows my name. So this is how easy you can also protect your API routes with this current user function from Clerk that allows you to check to see if there is a user or not. It actually gives you the user object, so you can use the details from their email or first name, last name, whatever you want here. And with that, we have not only protected our pages, but our API endpoints. That's a wrap for this video, folks. We covered adding authentication to our NextJs 13 app. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments. I'll be adding more features to our e-commerce site, so stay tuned and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.